Hello, everyone. I know I don't normally look like this. You're probably wondering what happened. And I'll tell you. It all started a couple weeks ago. This game looks fun. As you could tell, I was a clueless idiot back then. Sonic and the Secret Rings is a game released exclusively for the Wii in 2007 and the first installment in the Sonic Storybook series. The main gimmick of both Secret Rings and the Storybook series as a whole, outside of using the system's motion controls, was its unique setting. Unlike your standard Sonic game, the Storybook series had the Blue Blur travel across locations from popular fairy tales and storybooks, with those settings also contributing to the main gameplay gimmick of that entry. Secret Rings takes place in the world of the Arabian Nights, so its main gimmick revolves around Sonic using genie rings to perform all sorts of brand new abilities. And its sequel, Sonic and the Black Knight, has Sonic in the world of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, so its shtick is using the Wii Remote to swing a sword around. Both games aren't talked about a whole lot outside of the Sonic community, but they're very important to the franchise's history, being the first two entries that series veteran Morio Kishimoto worked on. He was the lead game designer on both of the Storybook games, and would later go on to direct nearly every modern Sonic game released from 2010 onwards. And just like every Sonic game he's directed, the Storybook series is incredibly divisive. Secret Rings received pretty mixed reviews back when it first came out, although they definitely leaned on the more positive side, with many considering it to be a return to form for Sonic following 06, which had come out just a year ago, while Black Knight also received mixed reviews, although these skewed more negative, with many considering it to be nothing more than low-effort shovelware. However, like a lot of Sonic content released during the 2000s, the community has given these games a second chance and are viewed a lot more fondly. They're still extremely divisive though. I finished Black Knight a little while back and really enjoyed it, but I've never really gotten to experience much of Secret Rings, and in my never-ending quest to complete every single Sonic game that can kinda be considered mainline, I decided to make a video on Secret Rings to finish it and see if it's as good as the game that followed it. My insurance provider also told me to provide evidence of my accident so I don't get arrested for fraud. Secret Rings begins with Sonic taking a nap surrounded by some old books before a genie of the ring named Shara awakens him. She tells Sonic that she comes from the world of the Arabian Nights, and that it's currently under attack from Eraser Jinn, an evil genie who plans to erase the stories contained in the Book of the Arabian Nights so that he can enter the real world and conquer it. With Sonic being Sonic, he agrees to help Shara put a stop to Eraser's plans. She gives Sonic a ring making him her master, and the two travel to Secret Ring's first level, the Lost Prologue. Probably the worst opening level to any Sonic game ever made. Instead of being a normal stage that naturally introduces you to the game's mechanics, Lost Prologue has you travel through 8 basic stages where the game stops you dead in your tracks to explain even the simplest of mechanics. I'm not joking, there's an entire stage dedicated to turning left and right. I can kinda understand why they wanted the tutorial to hold your hand so much due to the Wii's motion controls, but this is overkill and really unnecessary. The motion controls aren't that hard to learn, and the things Lost Prologue teaches you don't need entire stages dedicated to them. Unlike other 3D Sonic games, Secret Rings is an auto-runner where the player turns the Wii Remote left and right to control Sonic's steering. You can press the one button to brake and even tilt the Wii Remote towards you to make him walk backwards, but most of Secret Rings gameplay has Sonic running forward at top speed. Sonic can jump by pressing the 2 button and perform the air dash or homing attack by shaking the Wii Remote in midair. Oh yeah, and you can switch between rails like in every other Sonic game by tilting the Wii Remote in your desired direction. But it never actually works and is basically useless, so don't use it unless you absolutely have to. This is all pretty basic stuff, a lot of which has been in Sonic's moveset since the first Sonic Adventure. The only difference is that some of them require you to move the Wii Remote in ways that are very easy to understand. I don't see why this part of the game is nearly 10 minutes long, when other Sonic games have been able to teach everything this game does in less than half the time. After completing the Lost Prologue, Sonic and Shara catch up to Eraser, who reveals that in order to fully come into the real world, he'll have to have the 7 world rings. They're basically the Chaos Emeralds of this world. Shara calls the world rings a myth, which causes Eraser to angrily launch a burning arrow at her that Sonic takes instead. Eraser tells Sonic that once the flame in the arrow goes out, he'll die. The only way for him to survive is to give Eraser the world rings so that he'll remove the arrow from Sonic, and with no other choice, he and Shara set out to find them while also trying to figure out some way to defeat Eraser. Now that we know the basics of Sonic's controls and the setup for the game's story, we can now go into the gameplay loop of Secret Rings. After completing Lost Prologue, the player has to go through 7 zones, which unlike the zones in previous Sonic games, where they had multiple acts to complete, each zone in Secret Rings has only 1 act to complete, with the rest being... yeah, you go through modified sections of the level you just played, just with a basic mission attached to it. There are some times where these missions actually do shake up the game, such as this one in Levitated Ruin where you have to break Sinbad, who in this universe is Knuckles, out of a cage he's trapped in, but most of the time it's missions like getting a certain amount of rings, defeating a certain amount of enemies, getting to the goal without collecting any rings or defeating any enemies. Sometimes it's getting to the goal before an AI opponent. And then there's my personal favorite, which is playing the stage all over again, but you're not allowed to break any jars. Gee, if I had a nickel for every time there was a Sonic game on the Wii that made you replay levels without hitting any jars, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. These missions can be fun, don't get me wrong, but they're definitely the type of content that you can tell was added just to pad out runtime, which isn't a very good thing when it makes up a pretty big chunk of the runtime. After completing enough of these missions, the player will unlock a boss that they need to fight in order to get one of the world rings, or a cutscene where they just give it to you. That's neat. You might think that's kinda lazy on the devs' part, but I think it's a blessing in disguise, because the boss fights in Secret Rings are terrible. Not because of the actual attack patterns of the bosses, they're all pretty solid on paper, it's because of the game's awful controls. I already mentioned how rail switching almost never works properly, but that goes for pretty much all of Sonic's moves. Outside of braking, jumping, and your soul gauge moves, all of Sonic's abilities require you to tilt or shake the Wii Remote with no alternatives available. You can't edit the controls in the game's settings, there's no support for alternate controllers such as the GameCube controller, Classic controller, or even the Wii Remote in Nunchuck. When I first played the tutorial, I didn't think the motion controls were that bad. They had some small hiccups, but for the most part they were pretty responsive, something that carried over to Sand Oasis, the first proper zone in the game. However, when I got to the next zone, Dinosaur Jungle, they started introducing more complex platforming. Well, complex for this game. This would be basic shit in any other 3D Sonic game. And that's when the motion controls started getting on my nerves. The steering was too slow. In fact, Sonic's movement in general feels very slow. Walking backwards requires you to tilt the Wii Remote at an absolutely perfect angle or it just doesn't work. And the less said about the homing attack, the better. As you progress through Secret Rings, the player unlocks multiple skills that they can equip before entering a stage, such as Time Break, which uses energy from Sonic's soul gauge to temporarily slow down time, making it easier for the player to process faster parts of the game. Or Speed Break, which is the exact opposite of Time Break, speeding everything up. However, a lot of these moves are just things that make the controls better, and I can't see why you don't have them from the start. This isn't a level up system like Unleashed or Frontiers, where Sonic starts the game with low but pretty alright stats that can be upgraded to make later parts of the game more tolerable. No, Secret Rings has you start with terrible and unreliable controls, and then you unlock an option to have slightly less bad but still pretty unreliable controls. I literally quit certain missions specifically because the motion controls made them almost impossible to complete. Even though you're required to play missions to unlock major story events and finish the game, most of the time it doesn't matter what specific missions you complete and in what order. So if the motion controls ever screwed me over and there were other, easier missions I could complete in that same zone, I'd quit and just move on to those missions. However, the motion controls are at their absolute worst during the game's boss fights, which is really unfortunate because unlike the missions, you can't skip any of them. The attack patterns for each boss aren't the problem. They're all fine. It's the motion controls that make these a slog to get through. Take the boss in Pirate Storm for example, Captain Beamoth. It has you dodge its attacks while running closer to it. And when you're within range, Sonic jumps onto one of its horns, and you shake the Wii Remote in order to break the horn off of the captain. Repeat the process a few more times, and you're golden. It should be a very simple fight, but for whatever reason, the game requires you to shake the Wii Remote as fast as Sonic himself, or else your opening will close and Beamoth will attack you. Or this boss fight against Eraser Jin himself. Not only does Sonic's slow steering make it hard to avoid Eraser's attacks unless you have them memorized, which considering how long you'll spend on these boss fights you probably will, but in order to attack Eraser, you need to use Time Break on him as he charges towards you so you have an opening to homing attack him. However, the timing here is very tight, and shaking the Wii Remote, while relatively quick to do, is just that little bit more time consuming than pressing a button, meaning it's very easy to time your homing attack incorrectly and get hit by Eraser. Oh, and if you die when fighting any boss in this game, I hope you have the patience of a saint, because you'll be forced to start the boss all the way from the beginning. And there are so many more examples of the game's motion control screwing me over that I can show, both from the boss fights and the normal stages, but I think you get the point by now. They're bad. Like, I knew the reason Secret Rings was so divisive was because of its motion controls, but I didn't expect them to be this bad. I thought it was a problem with my Wii Remote. When I started playing Secret Rings for this video, I used one of the later models of the Wii Remote that came bundled with Wii Motion Plus, an add-on that allowed for better, more precise motion controls. So I switched to an original Wii Remote, thinking that Secret Rings might have worked better with the limitations of the original Wii Remote. And surprise surprise, it didn't. The devs just didn't do a very good job programming them in. As for the story during this part of the game, it's nothing too crazy. Sonic and Shara go from zone to zone, collecting all of the world rings with the assistance of characters from the stories of the Arabian Nights. And with the exception of King Solomon, all of them appear as Sonic characters, something that would be carried over for its sequel. I already mentioned how Knuckles was Sinbad earlier, but there's also Tails as Ali Baba, and Dr. Eggman as King Shahryar. It's also during this time that Sonic and Shara get to have a bunch of character interactions between each other. The two become fast friends, and Shara even tells Sonic about Eraser's past. Apparently, Eraser is the exact same genie as the one in the story of Aladdin, and after he fulfilled his sentence of granting 1,000 wishes, he had gained an intense hatred of humanity, leading to him becoming the character we see in-game. Despite his sentence being long over, Shara still has Eraser's old lamp, which she gives to the Blue Blur as a last resort. Eventually, Sonic and Shara meet Eraser again and fight him in that boss I mentioned earlier, after which Eraser flees into a locked door that can only be opened with the 7 world rings. Since I had gotten all of them at that point, I'm able to enter. After 5 or so minutes of fake credits, Eraser tries to get Shara to give him the rings, revealing that the two were once lovers. Sonic tells Shara to do what she thinks is right, and she becomes so conflicted that she ends up fainting. Eraser then tries to kill Sonic, as a sacrifice of someone from the real world is required for his plan to work, but Shara decides to do what she thinks is right and takes a fatal blow for Sonic, her dying in his arms. Eraser absorbs the power of all 7 world rings, becoming... however you pronounce that, although he can't enter the real world yet due to Sonic still being alive. And Sonic absorbs the world rings of sadness, rage, and hatred to become Dark Spine Sonic, which is basically this game's Super Sonic if Super Sonic had a cooler design and sounded like the Werehog.
If this is your world, then it's a world that I don't want any part of.
And with that, it's time for the final boss against this guy. And while I was pretty harsh on Secret Ring's previous boss fights, I will admit, this one's worse than all of them. Just like the other boss fights in Secret Rings, this guy is very simple. The player has to shake the Wii Remote to build up Sonic's soul gauge as quickly as possible while avoiding this guy's attacks. Eventually, he'll throw a massive ball of energy at Sonic, and that's when the player has to use the soul gauge and shake the Wii Remote to chuck it back at him, giving the player an opening they can use to attack What's-His-Name. The problem with the boss fight, once again, is the controls. Not only do you need to shake the Wii Remote crazy fast in order to build it up quickly enough, but you also need to tilt the Wii Remote left and right to steer Sonic just like the rest of the game, meaning that pulling off both of these is made much harder than it needs to be. Tilting the Wii Remote to steer Darkspine Sonic is also just not as accurate as using an analog stick, making it pretty easy to get hit, which is very annoying. Because unlike Super Sonic, Darkspine Sonic actually loses rings when getting hit, and once again, if you die, you have to start all the way from the beginning. Thankfully, the devs must have known how irritating this boss was, since it only takes a couple of blows to defeat Alflelawelle. But that still doesn't stop it from being a frustrating and extremely disappointing end to the game. Seriously, these motion controls were so bad that it made me start sweating. They were so bad that And now we're here. Eraser gets defeated and Sonic turns back into his normal self. The genie gloats that he'll always come back to try and achieve his plan and that Sonic cannot stop him. And in one of my favorite moments in the whole series, Sonic whips out Eraser's old lamp, immediately scaring him. He sits down on King Shahryar's throne and forces Eraser to grant him 3 wishes. He tells Eraser to bring Shahra back to life, to return the world of the Arabian Nights back to how it used to be, and he forces Eraser to stay trapped in his own lamp for the rest of eternity. Despite how shitty of a boyfriend Eraser is, Shahra still feels sad about his fate, and Sonic makes one last wish as her master, a mountain full of handkerchiefs for her to grieve. The two destroy Eraser's lamp, and Sonic goes on many more adventures across the world of the Arabian Nights before returning to his own, ending Sonic and the Secret Rings. I really wanted to like this game. There are so many good qualities that it has. The graphics, while not the most stunning in the world, are pretty decent for an early Wii game. The soundtrack, as expected from a Sonic game, is amazing and does a very good job making itself stand out from other entries in the series. The story, while not as in-depth as other Sonic games from the time, is really good and has a lot of heart. And the gameplay, while consisting of a lot of filler, can be fun at times. But the motion controls, and solely the motion controls, take what could have been a pretty enjoyable game and make it a pain in the ass. I'm honestly baffled by how warm of a reception Secret Rings had. If anything, it should have been panned more than 06 was. Say whatever you want about that game, it has a lot of issues. But at the very least, one of them wasn't that it takes a migraine to make Sonic do something as basic as jumping. I understand that Sonic and game journalists had a rocky relationship during this period. They arguably still do. But even for the time, some of these reviews make me want to spit out my drink. Perhaps all the singing, and we're talking every stage, is forgivable in lieu of the fact that Secret Rings is more fun than any other Sonic game in years. The Blue Blur stars in his best 3D game yet, but the overall experience is still flawed. Like what? You want to take the game where Sonic can barely jump and call it better than the adventure games? Better than Heroes? Better than Shadow or 06? They might not be very good games, but they're way better than this one. Even if I don't like it all that much, I still respect Secret Rings at the end of the day. It was a much needed win for the franchise after 06 and helped bring in some talent that would help redefine the series. And with the success of Sonic X Shadow Generations and a Sonic Heroes remake rumored to be in the works, I'd like to see both storybook games get a remaster or full-on remake for modern platforms, mainly the Switch 2. Project Reignition does look cool and all, but unless Sega gets into contact with the people behind it, it looks like it's going to be exclusive to PC. And the Switch 2 is the only modern platform that can replicate the Wii's motion controls but also still allows for more traditional buttons at the same time. And I feel like being able to toggle between the two, or having some kinda hybrid style between them, would make it the definitive versions of these games. Let's just hope Sega doesn't charge $80 or $90 for it. I'm paying more in medical bills anyways.